June 1945. Somewhere in occupied Germany. Patton's convoy was moving through a destroyed town. Rubble everywhere. Building collapsed. Streets empty. Then they saw movement. At first, just one or two figures. Thin. Moving slowly. Almost like ghosts. Then more. Dozens. Hundreds. They came from cellars. From behind collapsed walls. From anywhere they could hide. They surrounded the convoy. Not attacking. Just appearing. A little girl walked directly to Patton's jeep. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was so thin that her bones were visible through her skin. She looked up at him. Haben Sie essen? She asked in German. Do you have food? Her voice was so weak that barely anyone could hear it. Behind her, an old man collapsed. Just fell to the ground. Right there in front of the soldiers. A woman ran to him. Papa! Papa! She was screaming, but he wasn't moving. Patton's soldiers tried to help but didn't know what to do. They had been ordered to. They had been ordered not to help, not to feed them, not to show mercy. But a man was dying in front of them, and a little girl was asking for food. Patton stepped out of his jeep. He looked at the dead man. He looked at the little girl. He looked at the hundreds of starving people surrounding his convoy, and he made a choice that his commanders would later try to court-martial him for. He stepped toward the little girl. He crouched down to her level. Then he stood up and turned to his soldiers. Get food, he said. Get it now. Feed all of them. The officer behind him went pale. General, we have direct orders. I know what our orders are, Patton said. Feed them anyway. Before we get into what happened next, if you want more untold stories from World War II, hit that subscribe button. The date was June 22, 1945, 6 weeks after Germany's surrender. To understand what Patton did that day and why it mattered, you have to understand what he was up against. The American occupation of Germany was in its early stages. Patton's Third Army controlled a large section of Bavaria, thousands of square miles, hundreds of villages, millions of civilians. The High Command had issued clear directives about German civilians. Do not feed them. Do not assist them. Do not show sympathy. Germany started this war. Germany committed genocide. Germany destroyed Europe. Let them deal with the consequences. The directive was known informally as the no comfort policy. The reasoning was simple. American military resources were limited. The priority was feeding American soldiers, rebuilding American infrastructure, supporting the occupation forces. German civilians were the enemy. They had supported Hitler. They had allowed the Holocaust. They had cheered when their armies conquered Europe. Now they would face the consequences of that support. General Dwight Eisenhower had made the policy explicit. We are not in Germany to coddle the Germans, Eisenhower had said. We are here to administer a defeated enemy. Most American commanders followed the directive strictly, but Patton had doubts from the beginning. His aide, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, remembered Patton's reaction when the directive arrived. General Patton read it carefully. Mitchell recalled years later. Then he set it down. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, Mitchell, are these the kinds of orders that win peace? Mitchell didn't have an answer. Because winning the war is one thing, Patton continued, but we're going to have to live next to these people for 100 years. And right now we're creating a generation of children who will grow up hating America because we let them starve. Mitchell still didn't answer. But orders are orders, Patton said. For now, for 3 weeks, Patton followed the directive. And then came Waldkirchen. The village was small. Population approximately 800 before the war. Now unclear. Many had fled. Many were dead. Many were hiding in the ruins of what had been their homes. Patton's convoy had stopped at a crossroads to check maps. That was all. A routine stop, 2 minutes, maybe 3. But the civilians had been watching, waiting, hoping for exactly this moment. They came from cellars, from bombed buildings, from behind collapsed walls, hundreds of them. And almost all of them were visibly starving. Patton's aide, Captain Robert Hayes, described what he saw. I've seen malnourished people before, Hayes said, in North Africa, in France. But this was different. These people were skeletal. Their clothes were hanging off them. Some of them could barely walk. And then there were the children. Hayes paused. The children were the worst. You could see their ribs. Their faces were hollow. Some of them couldn't even cry. They were too weak to cry. That was the village Patton had driven into. Those were the people surrounding his convoy, including the little girl who had walked up to his jeep, including the old man named Franz Bauer, age 71, who had just collapsed to the ground. Franz's daughter was still on her knees beside him, still screaming. The convoy's medic, Sergeant Daniel Morris, pushed pushed through the crowd and reached France. "He's alive," Morris said after a moment. "But barely. Severe malnourishment. He needs food. Now." Patton crouched down to the little girl's level. She was still there, waiting, her hollow eyes looking at him. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, turned to his supply officer, Major William Crawford. "Crawford, how much food do we have in the convoy?" Crawford hesitated. "Sir, that food is allocated for. How much do we have?" "Enough for approximately 3 days of rations for the convoy, sir. Plus emergency reserves." "How many civilians here?" Crawford looked around. "Maybe 300. Could be more." Patton nodded. "Distribute the emergency reserves. All of it. Radio ahead to the next supply depot. Tell them we need an emergency resupply. Tell them we used our reserves on a humanitarian situation." Crawford stared. "General, the directive." Patton's voice went cold. "Major Crawford, I have given you a direct order. Feed these people. Do it now, or I will find someone who will." Crawford moved. Within 20 minutes, American soldiers were distributing rations to civilians of Waldkirchen. The scene was unlike anything most of the soldiers had ever witnessed. People who had been too weak to stand were suddenly finding strength. Mothers were feeding their children with shaking hands. Old men were eating with tears running down their faces. Franz Bauer was carried to the convoy's medical area. Sergeant Morris worked on him for 40 minutes. "Another hour, and he would have died," Morris said later. Franz survived. The little girl, her name was Elsa, sat down on a piece of rubble and ate an American ration. Slowly, carefully, as if she was afraid it would disappear. Patton watched her eat. Then he walked back to his jeep and wrote a message to High Command. He didn't ask permission. He didn't apologize. He simply reported what he had done and why. "I have distributed emergency rations to approximately 300 German civilians in the village of Waldkirchen. The civilian population was in condition of extreme malnutrition. Multiple deaths were imminent. I made the decision to provide food relief as an emergency humanitarian measure. I accept full responsibility for this decision." The response from High Command came within hours. General Omar Bradley called personally. "George, you violated a direct directive from Supreme Command." "I know," Patton said. "Eisenhower is furious. Tell him I'll be there to discuss it." "George, you can't just—" "Omar," Patton cut him off. "A 7-year-old girl asked me if I had food. Old man collapsed and almost died in front of my convoy. I had food. I fed them. If that's a court-martial offense, then court-martial me." Bradley was silent. "Because I will do it again," Patton continued. "Every time I see starving children in my occupation zone, I will feed them, with or without orders." There was no court-martial. Instead, 3 days later, the High Command quietly revised the directive. The no-comfort policy was modified. American commanders were given discretion to provide emergency humanitarian assistance in cases of imminent risk to civilian life. It wasn't everything Patton wanted, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, American soldiers in Patton's zone began systematic food distribution to the most vulnerable civilians. Franz Bauer recovered fully. His daughter wrote to the American military. Franz Bauer recovered fully. His daughter wrote to the American military, Farnletour headquarters months later to thank the soldiers who had saved her father's life. Elsa grew up in Waldkirchen. In interviews decades later, she spoke about the American general who had crouched down to her level. "He looked at me," she said, "really looked at me, and then he fed us. I never forgot that." Patton never mentioned the Waldkirchen incident publicly, but in a letter to his wife, he wrote, "Today a little girl asked me if I had food. I did. I fed her. I fed all of them. I violated my orders. I accepted responsibility, and I would do it again tomorrow. Because the measure of American values is not how we treat our friends. It's how we treat our enemies, especially the innocent ones who never chose to be our enemies at all." Years later, military historians would point to Patton's decision at Waldkirchen as one of the first cracks in the occupation's harsh civilian policy. A decision made not by politicians or diplomats, but by a general who crouched down to a starving child's level and chose humanity over orders. Was he right to violate his orders? Was he right to prioritize civilian lives over military directives? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about World War II and what real strength means, make sure to subscribe. Stories about World War II and what real moral courage looks like. Make sure to subscribe.